This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, jerks?
Manning retired.
Sean.
Both.
I like kickers.
Put him on the board. Hausch Mazzoli. Got it. Championship.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. I am your host, as always, Jason Jarvie. Follow me on Twitter at Jarvie the King. Make sure to send any and all fantasy questions to my Twitter, or you can reach out to the Detroit Sports Podcast Network Twitter at Detroit Podcast. And we are into week 3 of the NFL season. Hopefully you guys all started 2-0, but I know it's always not that perfect. This is actually one of my first seasons where both of my teams, they started 2-0. I didn't really have too many hiccups. Both of my games came down to Monday Night Football. I had one guy. I didn't really have to get a whole lot of help from my players on the Monday Night Football, but it all worked out for me in the end on Monday Night Football. But it doesn't work out for everybody like that, and that's why I'm here. I'm here to help you, guide you through these weeks and help you win these fantasy games. And I'm going to go over and break down a lot of the big matchups of this week, and I'll give you my sleepers and the guys who I think aren't going to do that great this week at the end of the episode. But I got to start out by breaking down the Thursday Night Football game, and I'm going to save my thoughts on Todd Gurley for the end of it. So I'll start off. It was a high scoring game. You didn't really expect this Thursday Night Football game to do a whole lot. It was the LA Rams going to San Francisco to take on the 49ers, two perpetually not that great teams. The Rams had looked like they were turning it around, but the 49ers were looking like hot garbage, and it turned out to be kind of a shootout. 41-39, Rams get the victory, and Jared Goff, 292, 3 touchdowns. Nobody probably started him. Carlos Hyde, he had 84 yards and 2 touchdowns. Pierre Garçon, 7 receptions, 142 yards. And, then Sammy Watkins on the LA Rams had 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. Robert Woods threw in another 108 yards without a TD. But the main story of this game has got to be Todd Gurley. And he's right now at this point, he's looking to be the steal of most fantasy drafts. He finished the game with 113 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, and then added on another 5 catches for 36 yards and a receiving touchdown. And so at this point, Todd Gurley he's already reached his touchdown total from last year just through week 3 of the NFL season. So it's gotta make fantasy owners pretty happy that they drafted him. I know in the 2 drafts that I was in, Todd Gurley was in a regular snake draft. He was drafted. He was the 7th running back taken, and I think he was taken at number 16 overall, and he was taken after a guy like Zeke Elliott, who we weren't sure if he was actually going to play the entire year, and Leonard Fournette, a rookie. He was highly touted, but he's playing in the Jacksonville Jaguars. And Todd Gurley at this point right now has definitely paid off dividends more for fantasy owners than those other 2 guys. And in the new dynasty auction draft that we had, he was the big guys, the David Johnsons, the Le'Veon Bells, they went for over $60, but Todd Gurley ended up being only the 8th highest running back out of that. Somebody got the team who got him for $32. And just to kind of give a rundown of the prices for the other guys that went before him, David Johnson 65, Le'Veon Bell 63, Zeke Elliott 49, Devontae Freeman 48, LaShawn McCoy 42, Melvin Gordon 38, and Kareem Hunt for $35, and then Todd Gurley came in at 32. And, there are some guys on that list who are definitely going to do really good. Le'Veon Bell's doing really, really good. Kareem Hunt is having an amazing rookie season. And, Devontae Freeman, Zeke Elliott, they're going to be really good. But Todd Gurley is definitely looking like just a steal in this draft. At this point, he's if we were just to extrapolate over the rest of the season, he's on pace for 1,280 rushing yards, 70 catches, 750 receiving yards, and 32 total touchdowns. Now, is he going to reach that total? I think it might be a stretch because the Rams don't get to play the San Francisco 49ers every week, and they're going to run up against some pretty solid defenses throughout the year. So I wouldn't expect him to really reach those heights. That would definitely he would probably be the top running back in the league if he reached those numbers. But I can definitely see Todd Gurley. This is a bounce back season. He's looking more like his rookie season form, Todd Gurley, as opposed to last year where it just kind of came out of nowhere that he was a big pile of garbage. And people are definitely going to regret not taking Todd Gurley earlier in drafts this year. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see the rest of the way what Todd Gurley can do. Not else much from this Thursday night football matchup. Like I said, I went over the stats. Jared Goff might be an okay bye-week quarterback. He's not going to be a starter at this point. Carlos Hyde, he's always going to be up and down. And, if anything, maybe Sammy Watkins becomes a serviceable wide receiver 2 or a decent flex option. But definitely the big story out of that Thursday Night Football was Todd Gurley. And my suggestion for you, if you're on a team where you're set the rest of the way, then you're gonna have a lot of success. Todd Gurley is gonna definitely help your team win this season. But let's just say you're on a team where you got Todd Gurley, but maybe the rest of your team isn't looking so hot, or you've suffered some injuries and you want to stack up. Now is probably going to be the point where you're going to get the most out of Todd Gurley because everyone's talking about him. Everyone is so high on him at this point. You just heard me list off the stats of what he could possibly do, and that's really just kind of a baseline ceiling of what he could do. He could conceivably be even better than that, but more than likely he'll be a little bit less than what I predicted, if not right around there. And so you're going to be able to max out his value right now. So if you are looking to pick up maybe another depth running back, and maybe you're looking for some wide receivers or quarterback help, wherever you need help on your team this point, this might be the week to try and to feel out those teams who are panicking a little bit, who themselves they don't have a good running back. And you're going to get as much as you can out of Todd Gurley this week if you want to try and trade him. And conversely, if you are a team who's trying to get Todd Gurley, beware of this, because if you're gonna pretty much sell your whole team to try and capitalize on this one player, you have to be very careful, because there is the possibility he is on the LA Rams, and I'm not sure if they're going to be able to sustain this success the entire season. So you don't want to mortgage your entire fantasy season just for one player. So if you're a Gurley owner, sell high. If you're a guy who's looking to try and get Todd Gurley, don't sell your entire team. And if you're on a team where you're pretty much set and you have Todd Gurley as well, then you are in the best shape possible. And I wish you the best of luck the rest of the season. But it's about time. Let's dive into the rest of these big matchups for week 3 of the fantasy football season. So starting in the 1 o'clock games, you have the Denver Broncos taking on the Buffalo Bills. And probably the one big thing that I want to pull out from this game is C.J. Anderson. And CJ Anderson we weren't really sure what was going to happen in the Denver backfield. Devontae Booker was injured, and he was kind of thought of as one of the lead running backs in that crew. They still have Jamal Charles on that team, but last week CJ Anderson really kind of breakout week, and if you happen to start him, you probably won that week, unless the rest of your team just pooped the bed. So going on the road, taking on the Buffalo Bills, I do kind of see CJ Anderson taking a step back this week. I don't think he's going to have as big of a season or as big of a week this week. So I'd be careful with him. If it's a question between CJ Anderson and somebody else, make sure to look at the matchups and that you pick correctly there. Trevor Siemian, he's not going to be a starting quarterback this week. Demaryius Thomas, you probably have to start him at this point. And Emmanuel Sanders, I think, also moves up into that category where he's a strong flex play in most leagues. On the other side of the ball with the Buffalo Bills, Tyrod Taylor not doing too much. He's not really going to give you a ton of points as a starter. So he's on the bench or probably on most leagues waiver wires. LaShawn McCoy, he's still he's running solid. He's really the only solid part of that Buffalo Bills offense at this point. And the only other guy who I might think about starting for the Bills would be the tight end Charles Clay. I see Clay as one of those, if you're a team who's trying to stream tight ends, he definitely has a tough matchup against the Denver Broncos. But if I see one weakness where offenses can exploit the Denver Broncos defense, it's definitely tight ends matching up against their linebackers. And Charles Clay is definitely a very good pass catching tight end. So that would be the one matchup I like on the Buffalo Bills. Moving on to the matchup that's near and dear to my heart and probably one of the biggest matchups of at least the NFC, if not the entire NFL this week. It's the Atlanta Falcons traveling to Detroit to take on my Lions. And it's a juicy matchup. There's injuries on both sides with the Falcons are missing their top pass rusher, they're missing their right tackle. The Lions are missing their new middle linebacker Jarrett Davis. And they could be without their center, Travis Swanson. So it's going to be, there's losses on both sides, but I really see this as it could be a shootout. And I know I'm partial to wanting the Lions to win, but I see this, it's really just going to be a shootout. It's going to come down to whoever has the ball at the end of the fourth quarter and who's going to, kick that last minute field goal or get that last second touchdown. On the Atlanta Falcons side, Matt Ryan may have a little bit of trouble. I think this Lions pass rush has, as I talked about in the Motor City Sports Rant, this pass rush has really surprised a lot of people. And if they can take advantage of the injuries on the offensive line, Matt Ryan's going to be under some pressure, and he's really going to have to try and get that ball out quick and maybe rely on some more short passes. Matt Ryan's still probably going to have a good game, but I do think the possibility is there that he could suffer this game. Devontae Freeman, you're not going to sit Devontae Freeman, but I think he'll get his yards, he'll get enough touches, he'll get enough catches, especially in PPR leagues. He'll get enough play that he's going to get you some decent fantasy points. And then Julio Jones, it's really going to be, Julio on the Detroit Lions cornerback Darius Slay and seeing who's going to win. And Julio Jones, he's going to get his. He's one of the most dominant wide receivers in the NFL. And I know Slay is definitely going to bring it, and he'll play Julio Jones hard, but Julio Jones is good enough that he's going to be able to produce and at least be productive fantasy-wise. On I guess if I look at the tight end as well, the Austin Hooper on the Atlanta Falcons, because the Lions, as they showed on Monday Night Football, they still don't necessarily know how to cover tight ends. Evan Engram had that wide open touchdown where he lined up as a fullback. So if teams really look at the weakness on the Lions' defense is that we still have trouble covering tight ends. So Austin Hooper could be a kind of a sleeper tight end, one of those guys you try to streamline if you don't have one of those top tight ends like a Gronkowski or Travis Kelce. On the opposite side of the ball with the Detroit Lions, I want to say that Matt Stafford is going to have a really good game, and if you look at what the last week, the Atlanta Falcons taking on the Green Bay Packers, Aaron Rodgers was able to get a ton of yards, and he was able to do it without his best wide receivers, with no Jordy Nelson, no Randall Cobb. And that's the main reason why I think this is going to be a shootout, because the Falcons showed that when they had Vic Beasley, they can definitely get a lot of pressure. I think that's going to suffer a little bit without him this week. So as long as Matt Stafford has the time, he's going to be able to pick apart that defense and definitely get his yards. The running game for the Lions was vastly improved last week, but I think it's going to take time, and I'm going to have to see it for a couple weeks in a row where they're actually consistently able to get a running game. And this is going to be a good test against the Atlanta Falcons. It's going to be between Amir Abdullah and Theo Riddick. Theo Riddick is obviously the better PPR option, I think, in most leagues, just because when he's out there, that it's more than likely going to be a pass. And in the Lions offense now, it's a lot of checkdowns, and Theo Riddick is going to be the beneficiary of a lot of those passes. And for the wide receivers, Golden Tate is going to be a good start. I think he's at least a wide receiver too, and I think Marvin Jones is another guy who he's shown that he's grown a little bit, and if he can continue to show that here against the Atlanta Falcons, I think he can be a much more viable fantasy option going forward. And then you always got to think about the new rookie wide receiver, Kenny Galladay. Caught 2 touchdowns in week 1, wasn't really targeted a whole lot in week 2, but in a game where I think it's going to be high scoring, you're going to see a lot of opportunities in the red zone where I think the Lions are going to look at a guy like Kenny Galladay. Lastly, for the Lions, you got to take a look at their tight end, Eric Ebron, who I've been very critical of on this podcast and on the Motor City Sports Rant. But if he's actually starting to get it together, he's going to be a legitimate top 10, maybe even top 5 tight end for fantasy, because Stafford needs that reliable big target who can get them first downs. And you saw that last week where he made critical catches. He didn't make huge mistakes. And if he can be that, he's going to be a viable player. And I would really consider him. He's definitely a top 10 tight end at this point. And I think he's definitely worth a start in this game where it's going to be a high scoring affair. So going on to the next matchup, we got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going to Minnesota to take on the Vikings. And the biggest question in this game is who's going to be the quarterback for Minnesota? And if it's not going to be Sam Bradford and Teddy Bridgewater is not healthy, it's going to affect the entire Minnesota team. It's going to affect Dalvin Cook. It's going to affect Stephon Diggs. It's going to affect Adam Thielen, Laquan Treadwell, Kyle Rudolph, everybody on that roster and what they're going to be able to do. So that's going to be the big thing to watch for on Sunday is who's going to start for Minnesota. If Bradford is in, the Minnesota Vikings then have a viable offense. If not, it's gonna be touch and go. Dalvin Cook, he's been pretty serviceable at this point. He had the really hot week 1, and you saw he cooled off in week 2, and he's probably going to do enough to at least be a running back 2. And even a really good flex option if you have enough running backs that you're starting 2 over Dalvin Cook. And Stephon Diggs, he's definitely startable at this point, but anyone else on that roster, I'm not really certain of. And even Stephon Diggs, if it's not Sam Bradford, he's definitely going to suffer a little bit. He's not going to. I don't think the possibility of him having the big game that you saw him have in Week 1, he's not going to have that in this game against Tampa Bay, because Tampa Bay's coming in, they're hungry, and I think they're a team that's going to compete in the NFC this year. They will struggle though against this Minnesota defense, but I don't think they're going to struggle as much as people think they might. I think the Minnesota defense might be slightly overrated, and if they have really good talent coming in, they're they're definitely going to bend a little bit. So I think Jameis Winston, in 10-team leagues, I think he's probably a borderline start. In 12-team leagues, he's definitely a starter. But it's going to be a tougher matchup for him. I like Jaquiz Rodgers filling in for the suspended Doug Martin at this point. I think he's a sneaky flex play for some teams. And then Mike Evans. Mike Evans is a guy you're never gonna sit him because he is one of the top 5, maybe and more than likely top 3 wide receivers in the NFL. So that pretty much wraps up that game. Going on to the last 1:00 game that I have on my sheet, the New Orleans Saints taking on the last 2-0 team besides the Lions and Falcons, who is 2-0, the Carolina Panthers. And this is a game where I'm going to look at Christian McCaffrey to really have a breakout game, mainly because going up against a questionable New Orleans defense, the Panthers are they drafted McCaffrey high. They want to get him involved in this offense, and I see that really happening against the Saints defense because they're not good. The Saints defense is bad, so Carolina, I think Cam Newton is questionable at this point. He's gonna start. He's a beast of a quarterback. He's gonna get out there and play. So that's another reason why I say McCaffrey could have a breakout game this week, because they're gonna rely more on the running back, and they're gonna want to keep Cam healthy. So he's gonna probably have a lot more dump downs to the flats where Christian McCaffrey is gonna be there. Calvin Benjamin. He's a wide receiver 2 at best for me. I just don't like Calvin Benjamin. And with Greg Olsen out for like the next 6 to 8 weeks, I think it's going to help more guys like Christian McCaffrey or Devin Funchess, the second wide receiver on that team. And if Calvin Benjamin wasn't doing it now, he's probably not going to start doing it now that just because Greg Olsen isn't there. On the opposite side of the ball, New Orleans Saints, they could struggle a little bit this week going on the road to Carolina. Drew Brees is definitely more. He just plays better when he's at home or in a dome. So I definitely think Brees could struggle a little bit this week. The running back situation is just a quagmire there with Mark Ingram and Adrian Peterson and Alvin Kamara. I just don't see. None of those guys have really stepped it up yet, and they haven't taken a stranglehold of that position. So it's really going to be a wait and see. I'm not sure if you're going to see this week who's going to be the main guy, who's going to take the reins. If we do, it's going to be it's good because it's only week 3, and then you can move forward the rest of the season. But this is going to be I think it's going to be a tough game for the New Orleans Saints. Moving on to the 4:00 games, you have the Seattle Seahawks taking on the Tennessee Titans. And the biggest thing for the Seahawks going forward through the first 2 weeks has been their offense not being able to really just gel and click. So that's going to be the biggest question going into this week is going on the road. Are they going to be able to really start to get it together? Russell Wilson, he just hasn't looked the same since that the big season that he had 2 years ago. Ever since he got injured, and that offensive line just doesn't seem to protect for him. I feel like he's a little trigger happy, and he's a little quick in his release. So he's really going to have to start to settle down to really be a viable fantasy quarterback. And if this week and the next couple weeks you really see him not continue to get better, he's probably going to work himself out of being a starting quarterback, because you are seeing guys like a Jared Goff, like a Deshaun Kaiser on the Cleveland Browns, who they're playing at higher levels and they're just being better fantasy quarterbacks. So Russell Wilson in the next couple of weeks, this is a big couple of weeks for him fantasy-wise, if he's going to continue to be a viable starter, or if you're going to have to suck it up and just sit him on the bench for a couple of weeks until he can actually figure it out. The running back situation, it really looks like Chris Carson is going to be the main running back out of that backfield. Coming out of preseason, I think a lot of people were saying that Eddie Lacy was going to get a justifiable chance, and he just hasn't gotten a chance this season so far. I think he was inactive last week, and that was a healthy scratch. So that's definitely bad for Eddie Lacy owners. I know that sucks for me because that's a guy who I didn't spend too high on him in our auction draft, but I knew as soon as I put it out there, I wanted somebody to just go a little bit higher, and nobody did, and it sucks. But I might have to bite the bullet on Eddie Lacy. For me and for all of you other Eddie Lacy owners, the best thing that could happen is for the Seattle Seahawks just to cut him, and just so we know that there's no chance now that Eddie Lacy's gonna actually come back from the dead and have some sort of fantasy resurgence. But Chris Carson, he does look like he's going to be a viable running back. And I think once you see him really get the bulk of the carries, I think you can start putting him in as a possible flex play or, a bye week running back substitution. Doug Baldwin, I think he's gonna eventually get his. And if Russell Wilson does get better, it's just gonna help guys like Doug Baldwin be viable fantasy options again. And you probably have to start him at this point. He's still gonna get catches. I'm just not sure of the quality of fantasy performances you're going to get out of him until the Seattle offense really starts to click. On the opposite side of the ball with the Tennessee Titans, Marcus Mariota, I think he's going to struggle against this Seattle defense. I think what you're going to want to watch this week is the running back situation. At this time, DeMarco Murray is questionable. I think he might start, but I think it'll be up in the air how much he's actually able to do. And going up against a normally tough Seattle defense, they have been giving up some unusual amount of yards per rush so far this season. But Derrick Henry is definitely waiting in the weeds, and Derrick Henry could be a sneaky start this week if you're looking for somebody to plug into a flex. And the rest of the guys, Corey Davis is out. I'm not too high on the rest of the Tennessee Titans wide receivers. Delaney Walker, you're going to start that tight end every single week. Moving on to the next 4 o'clock game, we got the Cincinnati Bengals traveling to Lambeau to take on the Green Bay Packers. And the Green Bay is going to be Green Bay. I think Aaron Rodgers, he's going to get his yards. I think the question on the Packers side of the ball is, what are you going to get from the wide receivers? You saw last week, Jordy Nelson goes out, Randall Cobb goes out. Aaron Rodgers is still able to produce with Devontae Adams and Geronimo Allison and the other host of receiving options they have in that team. But Jordy Nelson, he was a play, and I think he'll be good. But the one guy that I do like this week for the Packers is Devontae Adams, because if Jordy Nelson, I don't think they want to test him too much. So Devontae Adams could really be the benefit of being the number one option in that wide receiver system this week. So I like them. Ty Montgomery should do pretty good this week. And on the opposite side of the ball with the Cincinnati Bengals, everyone's been way down on Andy Dalton, and I'm pretty sure he's been dropped in a lot of leagues. I'm here to tell you that this could be the week that Andy Dalton actually comes out and he surprises people, throws for 300 yards and a couple touchdowns, because he does have the receiving options in Cincinnati. He has AJ Green, who is one of the best wide receivers in the league. They have Brandon LaFell. They have John Ross. They have, who's the other? I'm forgetting the guy that they drafted last year. They have receivers there. They got Tyler Eifert, the big tight end, and they're going up against a Packers team who gave up a ton of yards to Matt Ryan and the Atlanta Falcons last week. So I wouldn't be surprised if Andy Dalton comes out here, tosses 300 yards and maybe even 3 touchdowns, and people are going to be really confused on what to do with Andy Dalton. Joe Mixon, the running back situation is still going to be murky. I think Joe Mixon, Gio Bernard, Jeremy Hill, it's just going to be a mix of those guys. And coming out of the preseason, people were saying Joe Mixon was going to be the guy, and he was drafted like that in a lot of leagues, but he just hasn't really produced yet. I think the Bengals have gone up against some tough defenses, so if they want to start get it going, then Joe Mixon will be viable. But I don't feel comfortable starting any of those guys at this point, outside of maybe a flex play. Going on to the last 4 o'clock matchup I have the Kansas City Chiefs taking on the LA Chargers. You look at what the Chiefs have done so far. I love Kareem Hunt. He's been an absolute fantasy stud through his first 2 rookie season matches. And I see him continuing to do that against the Chargers. Alex Smith, this could be another game where he actually continues to do what he does. I do like the Kansas City Chiefs. Alex Smith, I have a hard time saying start Alex Smith as a fantasy quarterback, but this could be a week where you start Alex Smith. It's a big AFC West matchup, and both teams are gonna go at it. So it'll be an interesting matchup to watch. On the Chargers side of the ball, Melvin Gordon right now is looking like he's going to be questionable. I think he's probably still going to start, but he's going to have a tough time going up against that Kansas City Chiefs defense. Phillip Rivers, I think all the Chargers are going to have a hard time against this Chiefs defense, because the Chiefs, they've been kind of on the cusp. They've had all the right pieces, but they've never really been able to finish the season. This might be the season where the Chiefs are able to actually do that and get to have some playoff success in the NFL. And it spells trouble for Chargers fantasy wise this week. Going on to the Sunday night game, I'm not a huge fan of it. It's Oakland at Washington, but there's just not a whole lot of fantasy there. There's Marshawn Lynch, there's Derek Carr, Amari Cooper, and Kirk Cousins, but it's just not a fun matchup. I think Marshawn Lynch will be good. I think Derek Carr will have a good game, but it's just these. I don't think any matchup you get in that game, none of that's going to be one of the game breakers for this week in fantasy. And finally, coming to the last matchup of the week, the Monday Night Football game, the Arizona Cardinals are hosting the Dallas Cowboys. And I think the Cowboys are going to come in. I think they're kind of pissed after last week, and they're going to come in and want to prove to people that they are still a great team. And I see Zeke Elliott coming in and just having a monster of a game. I think Dak Prescott, he's definitely going to be more prepared. So I like all the Dallas Cowboys this week. Dak Prescott, Zeke Elliott, Dez Bryant, Jason Witten has been a surprise at tight end. If you're looking to, he may be on a lot of leagues waiver wire. I suggest maybe picking him up, and he could be, outside of a tight end play, he might even be a flex play for some leagues. So I do like the Dallas Cowboys. I think the Arizona Cardinals, they're just struggling. No, David Johnson was that team. Carson Palmer, he's going to be okay. They struggled. They pulled out a victory last week, just barely. They needed overtime to do that. And I think they're going to continue to struggle against this Dallas team. So I don't like Carson Palmer to start this week. I'm not a fan of any of the running backs that they have on the Cardinals. The only guy who I'd consider starting is Larry Fitzgerald, just because I know he's going to get some catches and he's going to get yards. He could even get a touchdown, but I'm just not it's complete opposites. I'm a fan of all the Cowboys this week, and I'm not a fan of really any of the Cardinals. So moving on to my starts and sits of the week, I'll give you 2 quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers who I like, 2 quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers that I don't like this week. So starting with the quarterbacks, I already talked about him, Andy Dalton. I think he could have a big week this week going up against Green Bay, who their defense looks like it's Swiss cheese. And Andy Dalton, with all the weapons he has there, could actually have a good game. And then the other guy who I like this week at quarterback, Jay Cutler. The Miami Dolphins going to the Meadowlands to take on the New York Jets. The Jets are an awful team, and Jay Cutler has proven, through 1 week that he's a serviceable quarterback still. And with what he has around him, I think Jay Cutler could have a pretty solid week. Quarterbacks that I don't like this week, but you're more than likely going to start. Drew Brees, you're going to start, but I don't like him this week taking on Carolina. And also Phillip Rivers, they're host to Kansas City. I think that's a really good defense. But Phillip Rivers, I think they're gonna suffer this week. Moving on to running backs, the guys I like, Frank Gore, the Indianapolis Colts, they're hosting the Cleveland Browns. I think he's gonna have a good week against a very poor defense. And I do feel weird talking about a Chicago Bear, but Tariq Cohen, he's the backup running back for the Bears even, but Jordan Howard, he's been nicked and banged up, and I think Tariq Cohen has really shown that he's a more explosive running back at this point in the season. So I think I like him going up against Pittsburgh. They're probably going to be behind in this game, so they're going to need their most viable weapon on offense to really produce for them. The running backs I don't like this week, this may be more of my wishful thinking, but Devontae Freeman taking on Detroit. I think he's still going to get his, but I don't think he's going to have as huge of a game as people might want for him this week. And then when we started out the matchups, I talked about C.J. Anderson of the Broncos. I think taking on Buffalo, I think he's going to come back down to earth a little bit. He's not going to have as big of a game, but I think he's going to struggle a little bit this week. And then going to the wide receivers, Devontae Adams of the Packers taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. With Jordy Nelson banged up and Randall Cobb out, Devontae Adams is going to probably get a lot of looks this game. So I like him this week. And then Marvin Jones of the Detroit Lions. He's really shown that he's grown this year. And in a game that's likely to be a shootout, Marvin Jones is going to get the ball thrown his way a number of times, and I think he'll at least get a touchdown this week. Wide receivers, I don't like Keenan Allen of the Chargers. It's kind of a theme. Don't like the Chargers this week, and I don't see Keenan Allen doing very good against the Kansas City Chiefs. And I don't like Mike Evans going up against Minnesota. I think they have a decent secondary, and unless Mike Evans goes absolute ham and just destroys the Minnesota Vikings, then I think he's going to struggle a little bit this week. So that about wraps up this episode of the Fantasy Nerds. I wish all of you the best of luck unless I'm playing you in fantasy football. Otherwise, I hope everybody on your team misses the bus and doesn't get there. I was going to say something worse, but I don't wish injury on anybody unless I really, really don't like you. So with that, I am Jason Jarvie. Follow me on Twitter at Jarvie the King. Give me all of your fantasy questions. You can also send them to the Detroit Podcast Network Twitter at Detroit Podcast. And until next week, later, nerds.